The film begins with a train passing through an abandoned area. Inside the train, a rough-looking man named Virgil sits, eating some bread. In front of him, a strange woman stares at him, trying to calm her child. After some time, the train stops and Virgil gets out, but not before handing his bread to the woman inside. He then walks to a nearby store and asks the owner if he has seen anyone around. However, the owner continues watching television without giving any response. Later, Virgil asks about the bathroom, and the owner directs him in a different language. After walking for some time, he finds the bathroom dirty and full of flies. Despite this, Virgil is forced to use it to relieve his stomach pressure. While in the bathroom, a manly voice asks him if he is waiting for someone to go to the complex. Virgil listens to this, says yes, and the man walks away. Later, as Virgil washes his face, a man approaches him and warns him not to waste any water. In the next scene, Virgil is shown with a truck driver, Keith, who drives him to the compound. On the way, Keith explains to Virgil his fare for taking him to the compound. Virgil is a bit surprised to see the fare increase, as he thought it was only $200. Feeling too hot, Virgil tries to turn on the air conditioning in the truck, but when he does, Keith scolds him, telling him that it will stress the engine and damage it. After they travel a long distance, the truck's tire blows out and they are forced to stop and change the tire. While doing so, they notice two wild dogs fighting with each other. Upon seeing this, Keith chases down the healthy dog and gives the injured one a painless death. They quickly fix the tire and hit the road again. Later, they stop to refuel, but since it is already nighttime, they decide to rest for the day and continue their journey tomorrow. As they spend their time together at night, Keith asks Virgil what his motivation is for going to the compound. Virgil replies that he is looking for the opportunity of a lifetime and is sure he can find it there. Since Keith visits the compound regularly, he tries to make Virgil understand that the compound is definitely not the best place for opportunities. He also adds that the only thing he can find there is hard work. However, Virgil replies that he is not afraid of hard work. The next morning, Virgil is shown driving the truck while Keith relaxes in the passenger seat. After some time of driving, Virgil starts to feel hot from the hot sun outside and decides to turn the air conditioning on full blast. This causes the truck's engine to fail. When Keith discovers this, he yells at Virgil and tells him to stop. After stopping, Virgil apologizes and goes to relieve himself. On his way back to the truck, he notices some rocks. Curious, he approaches and removes dirt from one of the rocks. The rock appears to be gold and Virgil is surprised to find it. He calls out to Keith and asks him to take a look at the rocks. Keith arrives there and takes out his lighter, telling him that if it burns and turns black, it is not gold. However, when he shoots a part of the rock, it does not change color and Keith concludes that it is gold. The scene then shifts to the duo using some shovels to dig gold out of the ground. However, the rock was so huge and so firmly in place that despite their best efforts, they could not move it an inch. After that, they decided to pull out the gold with the help of a rope attached to the truck. However, the rock still does not move and the rope breaks. Later that evening, Keith heads out to look for some firewood for the night. He explains to Virgil that wild dogs are very active in the area and can only be driven away with fire. Virgil hears this and joins him as well, and together they bring a pile of firewood. They light a fire and sit around discussing the wealth they have just found. Keith gets really excited thinking about how their lives will soon change. He screams and jumps with excitement. After some time, Keith mentions that since they can't get the gold out, someone will have to visit the city and get a digger to dig it up. He also mentions that he has some connections that can lend them a digger and suggests that Virgil be the one to go to the city. This is because Virgil is unfamiliar with the deserted environment and has no idea how to adapt there for so long. However, Virgil thinks otherwise. He suggests that Keith go and get a digger while he waits and protects the gold. He also says that he has no idea about the new city and doesn't have enough connections. After hearing this, Keith asks him one last time if this is his final decision, to which Virgil replies that he is a strong man and can handle the situation easily. The next morning, Keith is shown leaving the place after providing Virgil with canned food, some water, and a small tent tarp. Before leaving, he also gives Virgil a satellite phone for communication and a pocket knife for protection. Keith then mentions that it will take him about 5 days to return with an excavator. He then leaves after telling Virgil to keep his head up and take care of himself. Later, Virgil picks up the tent tarp and ties it around a nearby tree, setting up a shelter-like place for himself. He also takes out the satellite phone and checks to see if it works. Afterwards, he goes to collect firewood around the area. When he returns after collecting some firewood for the night, he finds a scorpion wandering around his shelter. He uses a piece of wood and chases the scorpion away from his spot. Night soon falls and Virgil is shown sitting by a fire, heating up his canned food. He enjoys his meal, but becomes anxious after hearing wild dogs fighting nearby. As a result, he grabs the pocket knife in his hands. The next morning, Virgil wakes up pale and tired. He immediately goes to empty his stomach but hesitates to waste any water to clean himself. Meanwhile, the satellite phone rings, and before Virgil can drag himself there, it cuts off. Frustrated, Virgil wanders around the area and finds the remains of a crashed plane. He decides to use it as a shelter, but since the location of the gold is not visible from there, he abandons his idea. However, he takes some parts of the plane and uses them as a shelter. Soon after, a tired Virgil falls asleep. When he wakes up, he finds part of his face burned by the sunlight. He then sits down next to the gold and begins talking to himself. While doing so, the idea of trying to break a piece of gold comes to his mind. After repeatedly hitting it with a rock, he succeeds and breaks a small but heavy piece of gold. At the same time, Keith calls him on the satellite phone and he rushes to pick it up. Keith tells him that it will take longer than he thought because his truck engine is overheating. He informs him Virgil says that he managed to break a small piece of gold, but Keith suggests that he sit right next to the gold and that he will do his best to get there soon. At night, Virgil can be seen sitting right next to the gold as some wild dogs approach him. He uses a log to chase the dogs away and save himself. The next morning, Virgil pours some water into a bottle and drinks it. At the same time, he notices a striped snake approaching him. He tries to kill the snake, but it runs away. When he turns around, he finds that he accidentally dropped the bottle and spilled most of the water. Later, he visits the plane crash site again and tries to collect more debris for his hideout. At that moment, he notices someone walking towards him. He enters the plane and tries to hide. After some time, the stranger arrives next to the plane and asks him to come out of his hiding place. The stranger turns out to be a woman who offers him some food and drink, but Virgil refuses to accept anything from her. She also asks Virgil about his motives and how he ended up in the desert, but Virgil remains silent and ignores her questions. Later, he offers the woman shelter in the plane and begins to leave. However, the woman believes that he is hiding something from her. The woman can then be seen chasing Virgil and asking him how he got there in the first place. Annoyed by the questions, Virgil confronts the woman and tells her to stay out of his business and leaves. At the same time, the woman notices Virgil's shelter and begins walking towards it. When she tries to destroy his shelter and tells him to leave, Virgil becomes enraged and hits her with a shovel, killing her instantly. He then takes all the useful items from her bag and buries them near his shelter. Soon after, wild dogs dig up the body and begin dragging it away. Virgil notices this and chases the dogs away. He then drags the woman's body quite a distance away and burns it using some firewood. As he does so, his eyes fill with tears. The next morning, Virgil wakes up to the sound of the satellite phone and picks it up. On the other side, Keith tells him that he has successfully found the excavator, but it will take him more time to get there because the excavator's load is slowing him down. Before hanging up the phone, Keith encourages Virgil to stay strong. Later, Virgil notices a truck passing by, but his greed for more gold won't let him escape from there. While searching for firewood for the night, he notices a sandstorm approaching. He runs to the shelter and tries to stay safe, but in no time the storm tears apart parts of his shelter, causing Virgil to run for his life. On his way, he is severely hit by a tree branch. Sometime later, the storm stops and Virgil wakes up from a pile of sand, with a piece of the branch stuck in his stomach. Instead of pulling the branch, he rushes towards the gold site to check it. After clearing away some of the sand, he finds the large boulder of gold and passes out next to it. In the next scene, Virgil pulls the branch from his stomach, bleeding profusely in the process. He then lights a fire and heats a can in it. He cries as he disinfects the wound with the hot can. Afterward, he paints his face with sand and collapses on the ground. When he wakes up, he sees a woman pointing a crossbow at him. Upon seeing this, Virgil begins to have visions of the woman he killed. The woman offers him some water to drink and leaves. When Virgil opens his eyes, he finds the woman nowhere around him and concludes that he is hallucinating. Meanwhile, the satellite phone rings and he digs it out of the sand. Virgil tells Keith about the woman and Keith suggests that they get rid of her soon. After the call ends, the woman reappears before Virgil and offers him some help. However, a greedy Virgil, who is more aware of the gold, yells at her to go away. Before she leaves, the woman asks if he has seen her sister, but Virgil does not answer. Later, when Virgil opens his eyes, he finds himself surrounded by a blazing fire and wild dogs. He immediately calls Keith, asking him where he is, to which Keith replies that he is nearby and will be there soon. Virgil cries into the phone, begging him to come quickly as the wild dogs are trying to attack him. At this point, it is revealed that Keith is actually sitting at a distance from Virgil, watching him with the help of binoculars. He waits and watches until the dogs attack Virgil and drag him away. Sometime later, Virgil can be seen being consumed by the dogs while still looking at the gold. Soon after, Keith arrives there with his truck attached to an excavator. He looks at Virgil's body and gets back into his truck, trying to grab something. When he turns around, he gets shot in the chest by an arrow. The movie ends with Keith falling to the ground, trying to figure out who shot him, but finding no one. That's where this movie ends. Thanks for watching.